So, hi. Hope you shared some good memories. We have like 10 minutes or so for questions or comments or reflections, if you'd like to share them. Then we open up the floor for you. No? Yes?
Did you ever try to ask the algorithm about its memories the other way around?
No, I don't think we did.
Why not?
Good question.
Did we do that?
I don't think we did.
I don't think we did. No. Good question.
Yeah, that would be interesting actually.
Maybe it would be a way to get beyond the idea of the binaries.
We did have a test person who tried posing a counter question every time the algorithm posed a question, but that sort of just went nowhere because the algorithm didn't understand questions.
Yeah, it was trained to ask questions.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your working process of working interdisciplinarily with theater, visual arts, but also engineering, because I know one of your colleagues is also an engineer.
That's true.
Yes. So basically, the collaboration started between a visual artist and a dramatist, and then we started working with a programmer in 2021, who later had to leave the group because of other work. And so it has really been developing. It has been a very research-based process, and we have looked into. We have also there was a time when we looked very much into biometric, different types of biometric surveillance, like iris scans, and we also noticed how iris scans are used in situations of migration, for instance. And this work or this research was very dear to us for a while. But then we found out that we actually wanted, what was most important to us was to give the visitors this feeling of being read by the algorithm. That was the main interest in our work. And so we created this game, the memory machine learning, the memory machine game, because it is something that can be played by everyone, everywhere, here or in Colombia or in Aarhus. Or, so the whole process was something that developed over a long time, and had many different arms, I would say. So basically, I think the main material of our work was text. So it was mainly driven by two writers and a visual artist. And but then when we started working with this memory machine game, we then got in contact with a company called Casper AI, who develop tools mainly for the film industry. And they've developed an algorithm or a program, a software that can write manuscripts. And that's when we started working with the programming again. So this was something we sort of outsourced to them because we are not programmers.
No, but we have had a lot of fruitful conversations with scientists and programmers, yes, and who have actually helped develop the work.
Yes.
From the off. And it's been very interesting because it's a very different way of thinking about technology. I mean, the arts and research, when they come together, can maybe shine a light on each other. Does that make sense? And that's been really exciting to work with completely different professions who think about these things in a completely different way than we do. And so I think we've been able to give each other something extra to, yeah.
So I think just to add to the constant or the red line through the work has really been this sentiment analysis that we found in algorithmic trading. This predictive technology that is trying to predict something based on data, because we saw that this was what the state started doing in response to the coronavirus, trying to predict where people might be based on analysis of data, and so we wanted to, but we wanted to apply the sentiment analysis on the audience somehow. So that's been the red thread in the work.
So there's a question here and one here.
More common, because what you just said now, I think that's so human and not something that the computer does, but we all predict throughout, we get experience in life and we try to predict what happens if I say like this, what will the other do, blah, blah, blah. So for me it's just completely human trying to predict.
Yeah, totally. Of course, yes, but so it's maybe a question of whether the prediction is based on mathematics or statistical models, or our social interactions with people. And I guess that right now, for instance, the development of the GPT language models and other language models in the same vein, they are probably going to try and add more context to make better predictions. Right now, it's only based on text, so there is often the context is lacking. But maybe they want to add more context, because we are, in our predictions, we are always in a context where your language, your body language, your eyes, your smile, your hair influences my prediction.
Like it was the evil. It just sounded like it was evil that they try to do that to us, because of course they do it out of a purpose to try to sell us more or try to know more about us to prevent COVID spreading, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so maybe just a comment on that. It's not bad to want to predict.
Absolutely not. It's an open, it's how you use it, right? That really decides. And Labs was not thought as a dystopian version of the future. It's more of a question mark, like what are these technologies doing to us, to our bodies, to our minds, to our society at large? But we didn't enter into it it wasn't an activist performance, or it was more sort of an exploration of a subject. Yeah. You had a question too?
Yes, I do. I really loved your presentation, and thank you. I want to zoom in on the monitor that was playing back fragments of people's memories. Be curious to know a little bit more about how that became part of the corporate space that you designed, and then also about, I guess, some of those memories might be a little bit more sensitive to people, and how that impacted what people shared in their consultations.
That's a really good question. Well, we've had a great interest in what happens to memories once they're datified, like when you break them down into little, and we wanted to give the guests in the installation an experience or a feeling of what that means when something is taken from you and broken down into little bits and just thrown into a big pool of data. To make that how do you make that a sensory experience? And the screen was definitely part of that. And absolutely, memories can be very sensitive material, which is also why we had to we consulted with an attorney beforehand to sort of make sure that we were within the limits of the law of what you can ask and what information you can gather. And so there was a small introduction when you came into the room that when you share your memories, they become part of. You have to give your verbal consent to that. So we sort of attempted as best we could to frame it so that people felt safe sharing and that they knew what was going on with their memories, what would happen.
But it was interesting because there was in the interview or the memory collection situation with the performer or the lab's partner, as we call them, the GDPR text was presented to you just before you had to share your memories. So for a lot of, and it was said there that we use GPT-3 and Google. So for a lot of people, there was a moment of reflection. Do I really want to go ahead with this? And for a lot of the visitors that we spoke to, they were being aware of what they were sharing in a different way. But we also got the impression that it was a very generational question. Some of the younger visitors who use social media a lot, or who have been raised and born and raised with social media, TikTok and Snap, and they were more sort of, oh, but you're old, so it's more like a problem for you. We are aware that true. Everything that we share can end up anywhere. So we are much more conscious about what we share. Whereas I think in our generation, we might be a bit more sort of not unconscious, but more naive, yes, and not knowing exactly where does this end up. But with the screen specifically, for a lot of people, it was very weird to see fragments, but it was fragments of what they had been telling mixed together with fragments of somebody else's memory, and also so it was also deformed because we used a speech-to-text software, which often misunderstood, and
especially in Danish.
Especially Danish, because
yes.
They're not so good in Danish yet, of course. So there was a feeling of estrangement for people, I think.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time, but
yes,
I don't know
I
what you
think
have.
we are maybe time for one last question.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering if I could pick up on a comment that was sort of previously made about, I guess you could say the sort of symmetry between human sort of decision-making and preemption and algorithmic decision-making and preemption. And I guess I'm sort of picking up on the long history of memory work that has been done both within the technical space and outside of the technical space. And I can see the kind of attempt here to bring those two together. But one of the things I actually wanted to ask was about, you spoke a lot about the staging of consent, the staging of care, the staging of safety, but I'm wondering if you can comment on the aftercare. Because in a human-to-human relation, one of the processes of memory recollection has to do with the mode of vulnerability, and it has to be contextualized, which usually happens in the communal or familiar structure, which allows that person to situate themselves within that memory in order to articulate not only what's happened in the past, but situate what might happen in the present and the future. But it seems like this process, you sign a consent form and then you're like, bye. So I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering because then the risk there is then the reinforcement of an existing algorithmic logic that fragments this particular type of memory for the sake of alerting one to the fragmentation of it. So it's enfolding in the repetition of, so it's no coincidence you put Freud there, right? So I just wonder if you considered that aftercare or afterthought, or what your thoughts are on what the intent, the ultimate intent of the project is, other than the aha moment of having my memory fragmented and extracted.
Do you want to take
Well,
a step
a very good question.
Yes,
Thank you.
very.
So the Labis was staged as a startup. So the fiction of the installation was that the company was in the early stages of developing the memory machine software. So the audience or the visitors were invited to share the memories in order to train the software, and the Labis partners said this upon arrival. Thank you for coming. You are now going to participate in sharing your memories in order to train the software. So everything was very transparent. Of course, a lot of people actually thought it was a startup and didn't realize that it was an art project. So after being in the memory collection situation, people were debriefed with another Labis partner who asked questions such as, how was it interacting with the software? Did it make you memorize something that you hadn't thought about for a long time? What did it make you feel? So there was a conversation about this specific situation, of course still within the fiction. There were some visitors who demanded to have their memories back or deleted. Then the partners had a conversation with them and said, we are not going to use your memories for anything else than this specific situation here. And they had a conversation with people about what is happening with your memories. So Labis was a critical, it was a parody, it was a critical project. So of course we wanted to create this moment in people of, okay, what happens to my memories? And perhaps this cannot be done without a little bit of maybe damage or collateral damage to some. If that answers your question. But it's a very interesting question because a lot of people who visited the installation wanted to talk a lot afterwards. And we had one evening where we were there and talking with people. We should have been there after each session or presentation to talk with people. And that would have been a perfect moment to do this that I think you are talking about. But we wanted to put the knife in a little bit.
But we had sort of prepared for situations in which people would be affected, and one of the partners would sort of take that person aside and debrief in a proper way outside of the fiction. So it had been rehearsed if anyone were very affected, that we could sort of deal with that. Yeah. Mm. So I think we're out of time,
Yep.
I'm afraid. I would have, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Ej, man, lige tage den her.